Hey everyone, we are going to do our oil pastel workshop over the next few class periods. We're going to use a few pages to practice oil pastel techniques, maybe things that you haven't done before, and maybe a review for those who have used oil pastels. We'll do 9 different techniques together, and first we need to set up our sketchbook. Open your sketchbook to an empty page. You can start on the back of a page you've already used the front of, or you can start on the front. We'll use a few pages for this exercise. The first thing we'll do is label our paper. We're going to write oil pastel techniques. Underline that. We're going to have 9 different techniques, so we'll label out each technique before we get started. The first page will have 3 techniques. Number 1, color blocking. Now I'd like you to leave some space after each one, a significant amount, so that you can have enough room to really practice each technique. Number 2, saturate. Number 3, light blend. Move over to the next page. Number 4, saturated blend. We'll put 4 different techniques on this page. Number 5, blending. I know what you're thinking. That's a lot of blend, but you'll see how it makes sense once we get started. Leave some space. Number 6, tint and shade. The next one, sgraffito. Eight, etching. You can go halfway down the page. 9 is stippling and scribbling. A few things about oil pastels before we get started. Oil pastels can be very messy. You can see the colors on my hands just from using them for a few minutes before I started this video. The best way to think of oil pastels would be similar to a crayon, but they blend a lot easier than crayons. You'll see when we get started. You can use the tip of a oil pastel, or you can use the sides, and we'll see how we'll use both. If you're going to use the side, obviously you want to take the paper off. So just find the edge of the paper and gently undo the part that's sticking together, and it'll very easily come off. So color blocking is going to be our first. You will want a paper towel when you're working with our oil pastels, because we'll see in a little bit how we can use them for blending. But the first thing that we're going to do is our color blocking on number 1. Our color blocking, it is a technique where you can create depth by building values and colors. So we're going to use the side of the pastel for this one, and I'm just going to use this red. You can use any color other than white. And we're going to use the side, and we're going to just gently block the color lightly. I'm not pushing very hard. I'm just gently going up and down to create texture and color on the page. Now, like I said before, you can create depth by building values or other colors. I'm going to take the orange and I'm just going to build the block of color. Now, any side that's flat would work well with this. I have a tip, so if I use this tip, it really wouldn't work that well. The back is a smaller section that may work. And feel free to try a few different colors. Oops, there was a little green on here. A few different colors of color blocking. And it kind of just builds that color. So something very important that you can see as I'm working, the color will start to blend on the oil pastel itself. So it's very important that you check your oil pastel before using it. So as you can see, I had green in this color. I didn't necessarily want green there. Also, in a few other areas, there's green. So I should have looked at my oil pastel first and noticed there's a little bit of green on here. So if I wanted to get rid of that green, I would just take a paper towel and lightly rub it off. This is why a paper towel is very important. So our color blocking, like I said, we use the side. You layer the colors. It can create very realistic textures, maybe grass with different color greens, the bark of tree with brown and some white, maybe a little black, but you can gradually build that color, and that's color blocking. The next one is saturate. And if you think of something that is saturated, maybe with water, it has a lot of water in it, think of something saturated with color. It's going to be a very solid, opaque area of color. You're going to take your oil pastel, and you can use the side or the tip. I'm going to use the tip here. And you're just going to color a very opaque, solid color. Now notice I'm getting some red on here because I didn't check my oil pastel. I did that on purpose so that you guys can see that if you do not check, you can get colors in your area of your artwork that you don't want. And then you'll have to create a happy accident with it. So make sure you check the oil pastels. So make sure you check the oil pastel so that you do not get any of the color that you do not want. Also be careful of your hands. This can get very messy. You can use any color for saturated technique. You're just coloring, I'm not pushing too hard. I'm not breaking the oil pastel, but I'm coloring in a way that there is no white between my strokes. It stands out and it's very bold. Next, I will create a light blend. That's our last section on this page. Our light blend is blending two colors together, but we're actually going to use the color block technique. I'm going to use two colors that mix well together. You don't want to use complementary colors. Those are colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel because they'll make a muddy brown color. So I'm going to use blue and yellow. This time I'm going to check my oil pastels and make sure that there's not a color that shouldn't be there. So my blue had some green on it, so I'm going to clean that off. There we go. And I'm just going to do a light color blocking. And notice my yellow has some red. I don't want that there, so I'm going to clean off the area that I'm going to use. Notice I'm not even paying attention to the other side because it's not going to touch the paper. Anything that would touch the paper is what you want to be mindful of. And I'm going to do another set of color blocking here. Notice everywhere that they overlap is green. I kind of ran out of space over here, but that's all right. This is a light blend because my colors are light. There's a lot of white space in between the areas of color. The more blue you have over yellow, it'll create more of a blue-green. The more yellow you have over the blue, it will create more of a yellow-green. And all I'm doing there is layering lightly using that color blocking technique. You can create a lot of depth with different colors and values, maybe with a landscape or the fur of an animal. These are great techniques to have that light blend of color. We're gonna move on to number 4, a saturated blend. And you may have already figured out how that's going to work. We had a light blend using that color blocking with a light color, but we already know what saturate is. So we're gonna use this same technique, but combined with blending. So I'm going to use, let's see, we'll do purple and blue. I'm going to do that same saturated technique where I'm coloring very opaque and solid. I'm not pushing very hard. I'm just making sure that my strokes are very close together. And I'm going to start on one side so that I get one area of color. The next thing we're going to do is take our other color, and I'm going to start on the opposite side of the area you want. And I'm going to color directly to the first. And I'm going to overlap part of it, and I'm going to come back into that blue. Now, very much like color blending with other mediums in art, you have to overlap but go back and forth into the colors that you're using. So I'm going to take that purple, come back into that blue, and go back into the purple. Don't be scared to go back and forth into the colors. By layering the colors, this is how we are creating that blend. We don't have stripes of blue and purple. We have a blend of blue into the purple. Notice how it nicely blends back and forth. We don't have one color next to another color. And that is saturated blend. I'll give you a moment to catch up. All right, we're gonna move on to basic blending, and we'll see how it's very similar to saturated or a light blend, except we're also going to use either a paper towel or our fingers to truly blend out the oil pastel. So the first thing we're going to do, pick 2 different colors, so I'll pick red and orange. I'm not going to really color very saturated. I'm going to just lightly color 2 colors side by side, kind of overlapping in the middle like we've done before. And yeah, that kind of blends it together, but if we want a nice smooth texture, you can take your finger next and you're going to go in the same motion that you colored, and you're going to go all the way across, and it's going to create a nice smooth texture. Now, if you don't want to get as messy, you can use a paper towel, but it will make somewhat of a different texture. So I'll use the same red and orange that I did before. So red. Notice it's not too light like color blocking, and it's not too saturated like our saturated technique. There's still a little white space in there. If you have it too saturated, it's just going to clump up the oil pastel, and it's not going to give a nice smooth texture. You want some space for that oil pastel to move around. So I'm just going to put my finger inside of the paper towel so that I can use it as a guide to go across. But notice how it's a little more smudged out. There's less oil pastel on the paper now, and you can kind of see that line that was there before. So you just have to be careful not to take too much of the oil pastel off of the paper with the paper towel. But what's great about a paper towel is that you can fold your paper towel to get very specific sections of blending. So I'll create another part up here to show you. So if I only, like say I want to blend in one area, a small section of the paper towel can really do that because it's a smaller area. My finger is a lot larger than some other areas, so I mean you can use the different sizes of your fingers using a pinky versus a thumb. but the paper towel does work for smaller detailed areas. And that's regular blending. Notice the difference between all of the blendings. We have a lot of space between the color in this one, and then we don't have a lot of space. There's a lot more oil pastel. It's a little more saturated, noting it's a saturated blend. And then this one is a lot smoother. Using your finger or the paper towel, or even smaller sections of paper towel, is a lot smoother in texture than the rest. Tint and shade will be next. For tint and shade, we're not only using a color specifically, but we are adding white, brown, or black. Now what I do want you to do is separate your section into two areas. So we'll put tint here, and we'll put shade here. Now tint, we use white to lighten the color. Shade, we can use brown or black. And depending on the color you use, it's important that you try out brown or black on each one, because if you use yellow, black can make the yellow look kind of green. So brown would be a better choice. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. First, separate the shade section so that you know one may be brown and then one can be black. All right, first, tint. We're gonna add white. And what's great about tinting a color with white, the oil pastel blends very easily. So I can take red, for example, and use my white and just color right over the area of red. And it'll make it all lighter. Now, if I wanted to create more of a value scale, then I would add my red, and just like other mediums, you take a little bit of that red with the white and you keep going to create a value scale, pulling that red further out. You can always add more of your original color. And we have dark to light. Now this is as dark as the color originally shows. If you wanted it even darker, you can create a shade. And the shade can be created by adding black or brown. So if I'm still using red, I'll add a section of red here. And we're gonna use brown first, and we're gonna add some brown. Now it did mix a little bit here, but it didn't mix as easily as with the white where I could just color over it. So you can use your paper towel or your finger to blend it out a little bit. And maybe I should create a larger area so you guys can see. I'm gonna use my finger this time. I'm just going to go back and forth, mixing that oil pastel. It's essentially what you're doing with your finger. And I'm making it darker. This is mixed with brown. This is the original color. You can see the difference, that this is darker than the original color. Now let's try it with black. Black goes a very long way. The pigment is very strong. So you only want a little bit. You want to very lightly color that black over it, and then use your finger or a paper towel to mix it. Now you may have to do a few layers of red and black. And you can see that the black also darkens from the original red. It's very similar for red. Now in this small section here, I want you to try what yellow looks like adding brown or black. Add yellow and some brown, and let's blend it together. You may have to do a few layers. Yellow, brown, blending it together. Now I'm gonna add yellow and black. Notice it's kind of a ugly green. I'm gonna add a little more brown and yellow to the top so that you can see it becomes more of a golden yellow versus a green yellow. This was our original color. So you can see that if you're using yellow, you really want to use brown to darken as a shade, not black. So you might want to try the black versus brown on a color before you add it to your artwork. All right, we're gonna move on to Sgraffito, number 7. And why don't we use a color we haven't really used yet? Blue. Okay, so I am going to first use like a saturated type of technique. I'm just coloring here. Sgraffito, the term sgraffito refers to scratching away. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. I added color and I'm going to scratch away at the surface. So you can use an end of a paper clip. You can use anything that's sharp. I'm actually just going to use the edge of this mechanical pencil. And you can create any textures or designs by scratching away at the oil pastel, and you'll see it comes off onto whatever object you're using. If you're using a mechanical pencil, you might have to let the lead come out so you can take the oil pastel from it. So I'm just going to scratch away at the surface in case you can't see that. It creates just its own texture. It'll move around that oil pastel and you can create fine details. You can even create a fine detail such as a feather. I'll show you, I'll do a purple feather. So I'm just going to draw out the shape of a feather and color it in. And then use my sharp ended object and kind of just make the same texture that a feather has. And you can see that fine detail. All right, etching is our next technique. And etching is the opposite of sgraffito in a way. It's like backwards sgraffito. So what you'll do first is use the object that you were using for your sgraffito, so whatever, maybe the edge of a paperclip or the end of a lead pencil without the lead in it, or some type of sharper wooden stick, whatever you're using, and you're going to first write out what you want on the paper. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a squiggle. Next, you're going to take the oil pastel and just lightly color over the area that you etched. You want to lightly color over this area because if you don't, you will go into the area that's etched and you won't see what you created. So then you have cool textures that were etched in the paper before you actually colored the paper with your oil pastel. Now the difference between the etching and the sgraffito is that the sgraffito, you still have kind of a blue that is in the detail sections that you scratched off. The etching, you see more white area. All right, the last technique that we are going to do is stippling and scribbling, number 9. Let's see, I'm going to actually make a picture with this particular technique. And so I'm going to use green and I'm going to use some brown. 2 different types of green, brown. I might use a little yellow and white. The reason being, I want to show you how you can create real looking textures or more realistic looking textures with this technique. Stippling is a technique where you're using like small dots to create texture or value with your color, and scribbling is what it sounds like, scribbling. So first, I'm actually going to just make a little bit of a trunk because I'm going to make a tree, and I'm going to put some lines out for the branches. And then I'm going to take green. In the stippling technique, you're just going to put little dots. Trees look more realistic if they're not completely rounded, if you kind of have them more sporadic. Now I'm not hitting my oil pastel too hard on the paper because I don't want to break the pastel. I'm just slightly tapping it onto the paper. Let me use this one color. Next, I'll use the lighter green. When you add different values or different types of color that's similar on the color wheel, you give it more depth. I'm also going to add a little bit of yellow in here, just to give it a little more dimension. Also remember that whenever you're using oil pastels and they overlap, those layers create somewhat of a blending. So you're creating more of a yellow-green in some areas. You could even add a little blue if you wanted. The blue would give more of a blue-green in some areas. And it doesn't stand out too much, it just looks a little more realistic as a tree. All right, I'm gonna put a little bit of a branch on the side of my tree here, extend that trunk a little bit, and I wanna put the ground now, and this is going to be the scribbling technique. Instead of using small little dots, I'm going to put multiple layers of color of scribbles. And so I'm just making small scribbles. I'm gonna use different colors. Sometimes it's just marks. They're not necessarily wavy lines, but just marks that create the scribble. You can always go and smooth some out. And then add more scribble on top. Just building up that color and value. I'm actually going to take a little bit of white, lighten up part of that. A little yellow. And there you have stippling and scribbling.